today we are going to begin with a little refresher. We're going to continue with one extra step of shapes. And we're going to consider what happens, how we deal with shapes and the space they occupy on our page. So the first exercise is going to be this one. And I'm going to ask you to pull out your paper, a pencil, and don't forget, as usual, I'm going to keep reminding you. And let's see, I'm going to use a little bit of a darker pencil today, a 4B, so you can see. There we go. Don't forget your grip. So overhand, underhand grip, meaning pencil goes on your index, middle finger, and the thumb. Just holds as long as you can. And I want you to leave enough space around, almost copy the size and relationships between these black squares, rectangles, triangles, and they should look a little familiar, and I'll tell you why in a second. So when we have shapes like this, we somehow create a map, coordinates. How do I find out where this one begins and ends on my page? Or how big in order for everything to fit proportionally? Now, one tip that I usually give is this. I look for the highest point, which if I look at my image, the highest point should be right about here. And I just make a mark right there. What am I looking for? Where that point, there's nothing higher than that little corner, and it should be going down this way, right? Now, I'm going to look for the furthest left point, which somehow happens to be right about here. Now, I'm just making a mark relevant to the angle of these two, and it's not exact yet, but also from the edge of the page right there. I'm going to do the same as I look for the lowest point. So here we're going to go, right about here. So at the same time, I'm looking for where is the lowest point and how does it relate to this one? Is it right underneath? If I were to draw a straight line, meaning if I had a ruler straight down, is it right aligned with that point? Is it further left or further right? And you make all these intuitive measurements. Looking, you can use your pencil, and we know that, okay, that point is way over here, and the lowest point should probably get me, as I look at this corner and now this corner, right about here. And I could also measure sort of an angle. If I draw a line from the top point to the bottom point, what would that line look? Is it right underneath it? And I know it's not. So as I go further right, is it like this? Or is it like this? What kind of angle is there? And you can actually place your pencil or your ruler or your measuring tool right over that line and bring it over. And I could literally point, oh my gosh, look at that, right where I had it. That's funny. And you guessed it, what is the point furthest to the right? And now this one may be interesting. We really want to, now we have 2 points. We have this one, the bottom, this one at the top. So I can measure 2 angles to find this point here. And I do that one right there. So it's somewhere between, along this line here. So I could see a line right there, and somewhere along this line, a line that is about this angle, I'm going to find that point, whether it's here, 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 or here. And I know it's not here. It should be somewhere right about there. So a good educated guess is going to be there. And then I'm going to bring the other angle right there. And wow, there it is. Just practice. So I have a good basis, and I know my shapes are going to fit all along in here. Now one more, because I want to see a simplified shape, I want to find the lowest and furthest left point, which in relationship to this angle here should match right about there. And I know it's not exactly vertical to this point, it's inside of it, meaning to the right. And with this information, I can now begin my drawing of my shapes with a little more calculated, it's a little more precise in terms of, well, I measure the angle here now, and I know it's a little bit higher. And with my grip, I'm going to draw that line. I'm going to begin to measure angles. Now, here's one trick that I'm going to show you. I noticed that some of these are aligned. So instead of just drawing a short line there, I'll continue it light. And same with this one here, which is almost vertical. Instead of just dropping that one, I'll continue it straight. Because I could just come right back over and then very carefully use those lines as guides for the next combination. Now this one I might have gone a little too far. So what's this point? The point of this marking I made here. And its relationship to this spot, it's higher. So right about here. And it looks like this line lines up with this one. I'll double check that, and it does. I'm going to bring in a little bit of eraser here to keep things nice and neat. Now you could be doing this very nicely, very loosely. Don't have to use a ruler. Notice how I'm beginning to loosen up a little bit my line. Okay, here we go. Now we should be thinking about how we put together a puzzle, because there's going to be all these clues and lines. For example, I mentioned this one here. It's not necessarily straight, but I'm going to give it a line. I'm going to go along this side here. Just a guide. And I know there's one connection almost lined up here where I could see how shapes almost connect at the corners with the little white space in between them. And that line that I see here as a guide almost has the same angle. That should somehow match. Well, see, we have something interesting here. We have a point that's missing right over here. So it's right underneath and just a little bit to the left. And now I have all my lines that I could pretty much guide myself with. Make it easier. So I could just come in and piece by piece of the puzzle, begin to measure, okay, is this halfway through? Is it a little shorter? How about this other side of the shape? So I don't have to draw every single shape all the way through. I can begin to coordinate. And now also remember, look, you see me practicing all different types of vertical, horizontal, diagonal lines in different directions. Am I going up? So what if I need one of these? There it is. Remember we practiced these week 1? Now it's the time to use them. So we have a point right there that gives us just a bit of an angle. So now I measure how much space is between these two shapes. Now if you want to make it easier on yourself, go ahead and let's add a little bit of hatching there so you can see, and also serves as practice. So I'm going to do vertical hatching, and it's not exactly hatching, it's almost like coloring it in using the side of my pencil, but that way you can see the actual matching of the color and shape of your drawing. May make it a little bit easier. Measuring more points and lines coming through. And here, for example, I have a little piece that is going to make it easier for me if I find it first, going all the way to the bottom, trying to measure in comparison to, it is a little bit lower, so right here, trying to capture that angle, very crucial angle here, this one. And I'll continue it because I know it's going to come down, but I need to figure out other things first, like for example, this little guy here. So I got that angle, I got the edge, and now I got this angle here. So what you don't realize is today we're doing an absolute exercise in observation, where we are also forced to use a little bit of analytic logic, measurement, where we want something to look accurate. See, I'm seeing this shape and it's not making me happy. I know this one should line up a little more, making it look a little thinner. And this gives me this triangle on the other side. And all of a sudden, pieces start falling right into place. And everything begins to line right up. So this was a tough one here. This is one of those. And you don't have to do it exactly like I'm doing. You may find an easier way. Wait a minute, I see how these, instead of doing the I see this X. So let me figure out this X first. And then everything else falls into place easier. So it is the qualities of observation that each one of us, that is the beauty of art, how we decide to see things, even though we're all looking at the same exact thing. You have a way, and it's life experience. It's the way your mind operates that you are going to see things in ways that are going to actually maybe show me a better way. But it absolutely shows not just your thought process, your observation skills, it shows your mindset, your patience, it shows your knowledge of things. It also shows your sometimes obsessions, even your feelings. So all of a sudden I got a jumble of things here that I could use, and most cases we disregard. Like, okay, I'm going to focus just on this one thing, but look at how this relates to this over here, and how can I use that information to make all of this easier? So starting with this point, and breaking it down maybe a little bit simpler into just a bit of bigger shapes first. So I'm matching the empty spaces like that X here to this one over here, because there's also like an X. I don't know if you see it right here. And there's a whole bunch of crossings of white space between the black shapes that I'm going to try to use, and then break those shapes according to, there's one over here too that seems to point right through, and there's my puzzle. So all these little pieces beginning to land exactly where they're supposed to be before I even, oops, there's a big misgap right here. So I made a bad measurement. and it will show. So if we take a bad measurement and we move the head, it will absolutely come through and show in the end. Now if this were a portrait and one eye was up here, the other one down here, everybody's going to see it. So that's what we're trying to get. How does it work? How does it work? Putting together simple lines, simple shapes, measuring the angles, and beginning to apply all of that observation and practice that you've done so far to have a result, an outcome where we can all see whether this worked or it didn't. There we are. So I have a miss measurement here, and I might have, yeah, I could see it now. It was right here. So I could still make a quick tiny correction here, make this a little bit larger, and this triangle becomes a little bit larger there, but it's still mismeasured, and you could see it. So this might have been longer. Now what I want to show you with this exercise, this might have looked familiar. So if you are not, please look at the screen for 1 second. I want to show you something. So you're seeing the shapes that we just put together. And some of you may have figured this out already. But what you're looking at, aha, look at that. Did you see it? It turns out to be a chair. So how did I do this? We were looking at the shapes and it actually just comes together. And when I add the space around it, meaning, well, I guess if I just go like this, and then over here, with the tiny little bump right there, I guess I have, oh, there's one more down here, a chair. And we could all see that. And it actually looks pretty good, pretty close. So here, what we are doing is we are configuring something called negative space. How does that work? So we're going to go ahead and do one more exercise so you could see how that works. And that exercise is called face or vase. Now, I'm going to take a poll on the chat. Can you tell me what you see here? And somebody's probably going to say two faces. And someone else might be saying, I see a vase. If you look at the red shapes, you're looking at two profiles. If you look at the white shape, it looks like a vase. Can you see it? It's very important. And we could easily switch that to the red shape is now the vase, and the white shapes are a face almost mirrored, symmetrical profiles. So this is the explanation for that. When you look at a shape, the space around it, meaning the negative space, could be drawn just like we did with the chair. So really quick, I want you to just go ahead and flip the page and draw your choice. I want you to make a good marking, a good, actually label it. whether you are trying to draw the red shapes or the white shape. And I hope this makes sense to you right now. What does he mean? If you see the faces, meaning the red shapes, go ahead and draw them. So that means you're going to be looking at the edge in order to draw that shape, and I'm drawing the red shape. But what you don't realize is simultaneously you are drawing the white, meaning the vase. So what if you could use both simultaneously to be more accurate? That's kind of what we were doing without knowing with the shapes for that chair. So very quickly, I'm gonna go ahead and start with what's called negative space. Now, using my grip once again, it is very important for you to really keep your eyes on the image, meaning you want to keep your eyes on the shapes you're seeing on the screen, hopefully the entire time, without looking at your paper. And just let your hand basically trace what you see. So I'll start here, and I'll begin just by looking at that curve, because now we're going a little bit off of geometric. We're beginning to deal with somewhat curving lines. Now you may take a tiny little glance, but it shouldn't be more than 1/10 of a second. The more you look at your page, the more it should feel like you're not trusting what you see, meaning you're probably not seeing it. But the more you fixate your eyes on the subject and you look at every little curve and the shape of it, the length of it, the angle of it, the better you see it. Obviously, you're going to have to slow down to let your hand be able to trace it. So I use this all the time. It's like your eyes are going for a walk. So you're not running, you go for a walk, and that walk is nice and slow. The slower it is, the better. And where you step, your pencil follows. So your eyes, without ever leaving the trail, meaning that edge of the shape, your hand will follow. Now let's go to the other side. And here's where it's going to get tricky, because you're going to make judgment, and it is your left brain that is going to try to take over when you do this, and the symmetry of it. So if you take your eyes off of your subject, and I know it starts here, and I know I have this thing that it's supposed to be almost identical, but just opposite. And my knowledge of that is going to try to divert my focus. But no, I keep my eyes fixated. I trust what I see. I slow down as much as possible. And my eyes don't wander. They just follow every single little step of the line. I have so far done this 100% blind, meaning I have not looked at my paper even 1/10 of a second. I haven't glanced. I trust it. And so it may be way off. Doesn't matter. Okay, it's a little bit off. Yeah, when you could see how that, here it is, the secret to drawing. When your brain wobbles and second guesses what you're seeing and tries to make corrections. I don't know if you're familiar, but like with golf and putting, you know the line, you see the line, but the jitter, and the hand does something, the brain says, no, push it right, push it left. Here, your hand tries to make, it's not your hand, it's your left brain trying to force itself over the thing you see. Now, I hope you kept your eye either on the red shape, white shape, but knowing that you could do both, or switch from subject, meaning positive, to negative space, kind of to confirm the shape, for example, right here of this angle, and then match it with, as you're drawing, we're going to get better and better at it. So we're going to go back to this sample. And I'm going to show you all of them. So there goes our face vase. And now these may look a little bit familiar. And you'll see why, because they actually matched the position of this. Show you once again. See how they were kind of lined up? I added extra, but they lined up just with them. And if I added the full, there it is. So what are we going to do next? We are going to draw this chair. Now, we're all going to see if you drew that chair looking at the chair or looking at the negative space. And I hope you do. As much as you can, really, really focus your attention on some of those markers. Keeping your eye on the subject as much as you can is going to be an absolute key. And make it a loose drawing. So don't make it so tight as far as, well, it has to be, textured and shadowed. No, just make your lines nice, loose. So I'm doing my measurements once again. The top, I'm going to make an angle measurement here to kind of match that here, beginning with that angle. And then from there, I see that this falls somewhere right about here. Now there is one more measurement that we should keep in consideration here, always for right proportion. It is what I missed in the previous one. The reason this is off here, and learn from your mistakes is very important, is, I'll show you here actually, I don't have a copy of it. I should measure width to height. So on my reference photo, I could actually go from one point and measure, it is exactly my pencil. The width of it is one pencil, and that same width using the same pencil, it's almost 1.9 to 1. So it's almost 2 to 1. It's almost twice as high. So from here to here, it should be twice the length than across. So one of these measurements should match exactly two of these. And that's where I went wrong. I went this much longer. Can you see that? And that's where my drawing went off. So it should have been here, and then everything looks more proportional. So I make that measurement. I can make that measurement, and now that I know, I could take this information, grab my width here, and using pretty much that same, which would be here, I could take that and make that 1, 2, right there. So I know it's going to be way closer now. And now I'm just going to measure my angles. So that one matches. That one lines up here. So I'm just giving myself some guide lines that should follow, a little more precise here. One that's almost vertical. And I know that this one, wait a minute. So line it up, and it doesn't match. So here, it should match a little more this way. So these are not parallel, they're in perspective. And I know we haven't touched on that, but, and this one matches a little more this way. So down a little further. And that means these lines are eventually going to meet all the way back there. Beginning to see how this lines up. I could see the squares. And here's where we get lost. What am I drawing? What am I looking for? So it is one way to find yourself through a drawing, to look for the shapes of your subject in this case a chair, but also the shapes of negative space. Add to that, in a future class, perspective, which is what I'm doing right now. And everything really just becomes a lot easier. Little by little, it should become just a little bit easier. So lined up here. And from this point, just take a vertical. And I pretty much have it. It almost, you could actually see the architecture of it, the engineering of it. Here we go. Where is my biggest shape? Again, this goes to the way you see the thing. Some of us may start here. Just like when a portrait, you probably start either with the eyes until you finish the eyes, or some people start at the chin and work their way around. All these different ways. Here, do I start with what do you see as your pretty much structural line that allows you to see everything else and fall into place? So this line here for me is important because it kind of just brings everything together. I want to make sure I have that one. I do. And make sure that from there, as a shape, I could actually look at my negative space. So my first shape is not the chair, it's the empty space. Just like we did before. Take your measurements for angles. And yes, there's a tiny bit of curve there, but keep it simple for now. And there's one more read of an angle. And see if you see that shape. So keeping your eyes on the subject longer should be probably one of your biggest goals today. At least for this drawing. And yes, we have that outer. Not going to worry about that right now. Like all of these outer edges of space, meaning the space behind these shapes, too big. They're just open space, negative space. I want you to draw these beautiful, clear shapes of negative space that we saw previously. And this way, it will become a little bit easier now that you know, well, usually, now that you know what it is, does that make it easier or harder to see it? And you begin to see how it begins to line up. Sometimes closing one eye makes obviously your binocular vision monocular and flattens things out. So when you flatten things out, guess what? Shapes, two-dimensional shapes, become easier to see. Okay, my first issue here. What happens with those lines that cross over? For now, you could leave them open. Yeah, but what if that actually throws off my lines? Yeah, remember, this exercise is mostly for you to just for 1 second, hopefully even 1 second, feel that aha moment of, yes, oh my, I see it, that negative space. I see the shape. Did I get it? Did I get it? Yes. Be able to confirm that you absolutely got it. And there's this tiny little one right here that just, it's It's kind of like that keystone to everything in this area here. Making sure that this lines up with this, giving me that tiny little triangle that then opens up somewhere over here to the next shape, which is a little higher and goes in this angle. But I'm not going to go there yet. Continue moving along, because if I start jumping, I've found in my own that if I start jumping from one to the next, you kind of lose a sense of what you were following, how you were saying the thing here. And notice here, this, now I know, continues pretty much straight in this direction. And this one is just parallel. So there comes the triangle right there. And it should match this line right here. There it is. That's how easy it should feel. Just like this one right there. How that one came together. And then how this one. As we come here, check that angle. And it goes just straight down. And it happens to be one of those lines that I struggle with. So look at that. Great chance to practice it. Yikes. Getting a little. Plus I'm also at the bottom of my page here, so it's awkward. But there we have it. Much, much better. So continue here. Find relationships between the other shapes. So I know this one goes down and it meets right here, right at that corner, and it gives me a little between, the space between these lines here should be right there, and it should continue in the same angle right to the corner. So little by little, this area, it's pretty much resolved. Almost. Here there's a soft angle. Check that angle. There's a little bit of an angle drop there. Make everything look better. Okay, so here's that area where moving a little too quick, make sure you stop, analyze, take measurements. Because one misstep in any of these can throw everything else off from there on out. Now, with the level of precision that you want in your drawings, obviously different types of measurements, and I will cover that in other classes, other methods for taking this just a little bit further. But it's just one of those pieces that in your toolbox you'll have enveloping, blocking, negative space, contour drawing, all of these things. And you'll use, well here, oh, negative space is the best option. And continue with enveloping and blocking to put together all these different types of methods one at a time. Or switching back and forth from one to the next to get the best result. Okay, so here I see these angles and I struggle with them. Usually also, the way our eye, one dominant eye, we have one eye that is dominant. So if a line is going left to right or right to left in that angle, sometimes we just, not sometimes, but always a little more difficult to read. I'm going to go ahead and ghost this line all the way. So how do we deal with that? Well, measuring. Measuring, confirming. Being a little bit lower. And figuring out that this line is going to go all the way through. So I pause and make better measurements here. Find the clues, basically. Find the clues that are going to do to this side what I'm very happy with on this side. So I may start moving away from here. It's too close to this. I need to see it from here. So I'm going to go to the edge, and I see this triangle, which I already know the angle here. I know the angle here. I just need to begin to find where this and this line up. That's the angle, so it's a little bit higher there. And that should make sense now with this one, which gives me this corner. So it is difficult to do this if you're doing it for the first time, to look for the negative space when you're looking at a chair instead. But it is absolutely one of the ways that I found makes anything you draw where you can see negative space and use it to your advantage, so much easier to draw. And I'm sure you're feeling it. If you're seeing it, you can absolutely begin to see the results. So this line seems to be moving a little bit away, and it makes sense in terms of perspective. As we continue with this one here, and capture this triangle right there. And you'll realize eventually that it is all about capturing that precise angle of a diagonal. And realizing that, yeah, all these diagonals, the angle and then the length, the quality of the line, that is what it's all about. And now I'll close it out. So I'll go around the opposite edge, not drawing the chair, but the space. So think of this line, for example, here, this shape that I'm about to draw here, or this line shaping this end. Think of it as the vase, and what I'm drawing is the face, so I could see it better. And it is one of the best ways for you to confirm it absolutely becomes more intuitive. Look at this negative space here. And look at this shape of it right here. So look at the difference in the curve. Way higher arch, and here it's almost flatter. And there we have it. Easiest way to draw a chair. So we're going to label this negative space, negative space drawing. And when you compare it to the previous one, and now you know where you were headed, did it make it easier? Were you able to figure out more clues? I think the answer is obvious. And definitely more enjoyable. And I don't want to rush you, but I am going to move to the next exercise. And this is something you could practice with any chair you have at home. Making sure you create some nice, interesting angles for space, negative space, and then drawing that You will have a blast, and it gives you instant feedback. Okay, so next we are going to do the next speed bump, which is, ooh, not that one, but this one. So I see all these lines and shapes on the screen, but what are they? What is that? Hopefully you haven't seen it yet. Obviously you did. It's an upside down horse. And the one thing I don't want you to do is call it that. Because once we name it, we think we know it, and then we try to draw what we think we know and how it's supposed to look. All I really want you to focus on is the same exact thing. So I want you to, I'll show you I'm going to do a very, very quick demo sample here. Follow me on this one. So, down here at the bottom, I know the thing that I said I wasn't going to name, because once you name it, you think you know it. But the subject, that shape that we see, that we called upside down, follow me here where I can actually look at the space, because I don't want to look at, I'm going to say it, the horse, or what you think it's a horse, but I want you to look at the lines. And instead of looking at what seems to be, well, in this case, the rear end, the tail, and the back, what I want you to do is, if you see the shape, and I'm going to pencil it in, I want you to draw those shapes that actually continue. So here's another one. Let me see if I can follow this. Here's another shape. See the shape over here? I'm drawing the space around the outside of those lines. So these lines are creating these shapes, and when I piece these negative space shapes and they begin to come together, what they're going to do, look at this one right over here. Did you see it? It's like, I think of them a lot as maps. Like, I don't know what map has that little point like this, but in a way it kind of, number one, blanks you out. You're not naming the thing. You're really focused on what you're supposed to be focused on. It's easier for you to see, for example, these beautiful and very, very necessary shapes of curves, subtle curves. When you focus on the outside, the negative space, wouldn't you agree? You see them better. And from there, we could just jump in and notice this one here. As I draw the shape, I actually can see the curve. So that's what I'm going to be doing. And you can see how I could just do what eventually just looks at as a silhouette. But the entire time I was focused on, this one's beautiful. See that? That's the one that I always think of. When I see the shape on my reference and I look at it, I know it's off, but I'm rushing, by the way, just showing you what are the things that I'm looking for. This is it. These are the shapes. And then when I place those shapes in the proper position, and the more accurate I am trying to capture those shapes, then I'm going to have something that just comes together. And you're basically just literally a few lines from calling this finished. So I know it's a mental workout. I know it takes a little bit of really focusing, knowing how to focus and how to stay focused on the task at hand, which is just keep your eye on the line. Try to shape that line looking at the negative space. So here we go. Can I do this without looking ever at my paper? I have, and I would recommend you try it. Now it may come off, the shapes are going to be bigger, smaller, out of proportion, but it is a great exercise to try. Now you cannot speed through it. If you do that, you will have to slow down. So I'm going to start here. This time I'm going to start at the top. So notice I'm not at the center. I'm a little bit off to the right, just a touch. And I'm going to start with this shape here, coming into this one. Now I am doing this blind. Can I look, just glance at it when I need to put my pencil back? Yeah, just a quick glance. But the idea is 99% of the time you're drawing, you should be looking at the thing you're drawing. Doesn't that make sense? How are you drawing it if you're not looking at it? Nobody has that good of a memory. I know this line is coming off. I lost my focus. I was going a little too fast. And to be honest, when I talk, it makes it harder because this requires, it's meditative. And when you deal with space, you cannot engage your left brain. So language comes from the left brain. The right brain is really trying hard to stay engaged in space. And they say that proof of that is when you get in your car and then, oh my gosh, I'm home and I don't even remember how I got here. But you just drove this ton of metal. Sometimes navigating through space at speeds of 35, 45 miles an hour or more, and made it. Your brain can do that. And usually, when it takes over, it handles space, which is exactly what you're doing here. So for you to know that you can engage that, like activate it, like a superpower. And I'm not going into any lines, I'm just staying on the outer edges, sort of like a silhouette of it, looking for clues, how to capture and I already know that there's a big hiccup here. This shape got way bigger. And I wouldn't recommend doing what I just did, that whole erasing. Just live with it as an exercise. It will show you more things you need to focus on, learn about the way you're seeing it. But when you start erasing, and then drawing over it, you're going to lose also that sense of continuity, where it was coming from. So here we have a little gap. We follow that and make a new, because we could also go into the subject, and you'll see that later on. We could use all of these lines in here as negative space. Absolutely works. So here, for example, my brain thinks, how do I capture this diagonal? And I was looking at the subject instead of the space outside it, the shapes. So that's where I mean you will lose track and begin to follow the subject instead of the space. So refocus yourself. Stop, pause, take a breather, put it back. Get that shape, look at the shape, and then draw the shape. It doesn't get any easier than that. These shapes, although complex, are simple enough for us to look at the line, look at the curve, look at the angle. And obviously, this exercise, you're getting a little bit away from all the other measurements and things we did. But knowing that you could do that, as you figure out how to see all these shapes, not a leg, but look at this shape with the curve, and knowing that the curve goes up and then down, and how deep or how far, and sometimes beginning to deal with that puzzle. And guess what? Look at where I arrived, right where I was supposed to. Now I know this little line goes here, so there's a nice beautiful shape that comes in. And I have so many clues to work from now, in addition to what's everything that's in here already, giving me so much more than what I need. And here was my issue with this one. So knowing how to stay focused and see the shape instead of the opposite. I think it's so far working very, very well. So what do I do next? What I want you to do next is continue. Let's go ahead and finish the shape of some of these lines. This one continues here, right into there. And try to maintain the same approach, the same mentality of seeing line, seeing the shape of that line. I mean, the shape made by those lines, the curves, the crossings, maybe some relationships, meaning, well, look at this. This line just pointing right here at where this one ended. Perfect. And combining all of these little things one by one, to start putting everything together piece by piece with the proper shape of a line. Simple. Very simple shapes. Go see around, continue here, close it out. There we go. And realizing that it is the mental process, the way you see or stop seeing it. Like right now, wow, that you may be judging it even. Where we're not even supposed to be there yet. Here's a big one. How you stay in that mindset of seeing only line, only shape, and being able to deliver it without losing your focus because of all the things that we know and can identify as you draw them. It does feel a little bit tougher because I know what this is, and I think I know what it's supposed to look like. But the truth is, if I'm not looking at it and trying to be as accurate as possible in this instant, it's going to be a problem. There we go. There's one more here and one more here. Moving forward, I could go from the outside and look at this little shape between these. It gives me all the answers. Now some of them may be a little bit off. Don't worry. Finishing touches here. And this one being the hardest, usually, because we know what it's supposed to look like. There we go. Now there's one beautiful moment when you're ready. Double check it. Did I miss any lines? Nope, we got them all. Oh wait, yes we did, right here. See, lost my focus there for a second. And now we got it. So we're ready to turn it upside down. Right side up. And there it is. Wow. Now, if I were to draw this or ask you to draw this, we would have run into tons of problems. Just this leg alone and the perspective, the foreshortening of how this is bigger and this is supposed to be smaller would have caused you tons of trouble, guaranteed. But adding a speed bump to your left brain and letting the right brain take over, focusing just on the outer shapes of negative space and getting focused on how to capture those lines gives you this. And I should be happy with that. It's pretty good. Now the line may be a little heavy. I could get a little softer, but there it is. So exercises like this one, and I should say like this one, and a combination of that with something like this, or even something like this. Well, it's tough when you put a chair upside down, but it actually would help and it would work. To look at negative space, to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and combine with quieting the thought process that you put into it, naming the things in order to get away from what you think it looks like to what it actually looks like. And I should have added a second image here. It would have been interesting to have you draw it right side up. But that's, I guess, an exercise for another day. There's one more. We have time. Yes, we do. One more that I wanted to do just before we finish today. And no, it's not this one. It could be. It's actually a little bit simpler than that one. It's this one. Just adding it here. Now, it may seem impossible to do in, I guess, the next 10-15 minutes, but if you can quiet your mind once again and focus on the absolute indispensable ways of figuring out the shapes that are going to put this puzzle together, this would be one. Because as you notice, there's more lines inside where you're going to maybe struggle with shapes within shapes than outside, and especially when we get in here and all these little lines that are doing curious little shapes that we think we know in here. How you take over with the right brain and just focus on the angle and the shape of the line. So let's begin. Most of us would want to start down here. That's okay. And I would actually just pretty much start off with rounding of the shape here. just to get a little bit of a sense of proportion. It is really tough sometimes. But it is necessary to practice, 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 sing and understanding negative space, the space around your subject here. I'm going to try not to go too fast. I'm going to take my time with this one, but you can begin to see how, if it hasn't clicked yet, it's this shape out here, seeing it as face, not vase, where I'm making this happen. Instead of drawing a shoulder, I'm looking for the shape of, once again, not the vase, but the face, meaning the outside shape of it. And how do I see it? You have to click it. It's like a switch in your brain that takes the attention away from the subject into the space around it. And it's much easier to start with the silhouette, but you can actually see the shape of your face vase exercise. So here I'm looking at the shape of the face, of the shape that I'm drawing, and I can actually see that it's very, very close. You see these little tiny curves and peaks and angles that just come together so much easier. The moment you think, oops, shoe, you lose it. Because then you draw the thing you think it, you know how it looks, instead of just this simple angle, curve, angle, diagonal, negative shape, negative space, I'm sorry, negative space shape, and be able to follow it just like that. Now I can compare the shape and I could see how it, does it need more curve? Is it the right angle? Without ever having to go into it. When you begin to have shapes within shapes, it does add a little bit of difficulty. That's when you focus just a little bit harder and break those shapes into even simpler. So here, for example, there's no shape within it, but I can actually make this one out, and there's a shape within that, so almost close out, and there's a line that combines with that. So only rendering the shape of those lines, or whether it's open or not. In this case they're open, or I meant closed. Being able to follow those shapes, continue following those shapes. This one actually crosses over. So quick adjustment, and it goes over. So here's a really interesting test of shapes, lines, angles. How you go first outside of it, and then in. And how you're able to navigate it into smaller and smaller shapes. So I'm beginning to go inside of it. Otherwise, I'll lose my place. Pretty sure I would. And here we begin to have the things we know, I gotta tell you, must avoid. The way you usually see them or think about them, and just continue breaking them down to little angle and shape. Little angle of a line and curves. And there's a good result. Now it may be a little off. Don't forget, this is just an exercise in observation. You can always do it again and again. Oh, look at that. We have the legs of a chair here. That's what it was. I didn't even know until now. Shouldn't have said it. All I'm worried about is combinations of lines creating interesting shapes. Finding my way. And again, you can always move. One big, huge piece, obviously here, here. This one, which is probably the toughest one, but not really. It's almost a vertical angle, quick angle with a nice little peak here. It's this one here. So this, finding my way through this one, this inside, created by our subject, negative space shape here, is one of those that makes or breaks, really. We begin to see proportion and how it's working. This one got a little too big on me. So I should have gone outside of this shape first and seeing that shape. So I know I looked at something else. I looked at subject instead of shape. And that's the big marker there. When I'm trying to draw the subject instead of the negative shape, that's what comes out. That's better. So you see this shape. Ooh. Come back here. You see this shape here, and I'm going to pencil it in. This shape right here is one of those structural, very crucial, important pieces. And when you compare it to the reference, I'm actually seeing now how this should be wider. And how when you begin to match these shapes with more and more accuracy, that's when you really begin to have satisfaction with everything you draw. Now that's a little bit closer. So in order for you to see it a little bit easier, there it is. So that shape, and that gives me this coming around. So I need a line that is just barely close to horizontal, but gives me this quality. And this is what we would usually call details. And these details are just added softer angles that are just sometimes smaller or never, I don't think ever really more complex. They're just more accurate in the way you have to, in terms of their location or their arrangement with other same quality of and size of other similar shapes, similar lines. So learning how to see what's actually there and how to capture it. This is one of those where, once again, it just takes over. It feels helpless. Like, how do I keep this line? It's a struggle. Yes, sometimes it is. When you're drawing an eye, the big problem is you see it and it's not working. It's not coming together. Well, it's because you think you know what an eye looks like. We have a symbol of it in our minds. And when we try to draw, it's inevitable for the left brain to try to take over and add what it thinks an eye looks like, or an arm, or a chin. That's why we continue quieting it, just making it a little quieter. And this upside down exercise causes that speed bump, by the way. That's why we're doing it upside down. In case you were wondering if I didn't mention it earlier, it causes it to stumble, to wonder, wait, I think I know what it is, the lines, this is where it should be. Hands, similar thing. So all the things we are familiar with, that we think we know what they look like, which is pretty much everything, since you started naming things at 10 months old or a year old. When I say sun, butterfly, cloud, all these things have an image, a symbol in your mind. And yeah, of course I could draw one, but if you're actually out there and you're drawing a cloud or a tree or a butterfly, that symbol is what's causing you not to be able to capture it. Unless you refocus and this allowing you to see negative space first, I think it's one of the best ways to achieve that. It really, really helps. And I think we're almost there. And I think I'm ready for the big turn around. And there she is. Again, trying to draw this, applying that method, always will feel it gives you a little more struggle. Understanding why and getting over those speed bumps as you having to work, say, from life, not from an image, and finding the negative space and arranging these shapes, putting together your puzzle is going to be the key to bring your lines, shapes into what we'll look at next week, which is the full package, all of it, including light and value. I hope you really enjoyed it.